I am the eclectic doctor. My interests are various, and where they intersect is where I love to be. We're going to talk about coding basics, and we're going to start with the block of code, which is the starting point for every program. A computer program is composed of blocks of code. Sometimes these are explicit, meaning that they have a start and a finish, and some languages, like Pascal, use words like begin and end to delimit or to surround each block of code. Most languages today follow the C language style, and they use these squiggly brackets to surround their blocks of code. Often programmers will use indentation inside these squiggly brackets, so it's easier to see what instructions are part of a block of code. Because blocks can be nested inside other blocks, indenting sub-blocks of code is a great practice. In fact, the popular Python language uses indentation alone to denote blocks of code. A visual programming language like Scratch uses literal graphical blocks that you organize into your program or your code. When we have decomposed our problem into a series or a set of steps, the ones that we want the computer to solve, then we can group these computer instructions inside blocks of code in order to complete the steps. It is also good to note that not every step needs its own block of code. The steps may simply form a sequence of instructions, all part of the same code block. However, the more complex our computer program, the more we will want to isolate our steps into their own code blocks so that we can organize our code in better ways. We can easily pull out code to reuse it. There's a lot of advantages to that. So it's a way of thinking through the code that's more modular. One more thing that I want to mention before we dive into just a little bit of code to kind of see blocks. Blocks are the fundamental component and allow us to limit certain elements to what we call the scope of the block. So if we need to store a value, for instance, and it's just used by that step, well, the block is a tool that allows us to limit the life of the value storage just for the life of the block. So I'm going to talk about scope much later, and it'll probably come up as we go along. Scope is a really important concept in programming. For now, it's enough to know that scope is just kind of programmer language for where an element can be seen by the rest of the computer program. So I want to use JavaScript to talk about blocks of code. JavaScript is a language that's actually built into all of your web browsers. It is well established as a standard, and you can combine it with a simple web page, and we can easily see how we can call on a block of code to do simple tasks. Let's jump over to my favorite code editor, VS Code, and we will play with this. There we are. So notice that I use indentation to identify blocks of code even in my HTML code. HTML is a language that makes web pages. Kind of a different kind of language than what we're using in terms of your instructional based language. It's more descriptive. It's describing what's going on. And so what it does is it allows us to take a page of text or a page of content and to put little marks around it to tell the browser what we want to do with it. So it uses all kinds of little descriptions all the way through. I have a video, actually, I'll put a link to it on the basic structure of an HTML program. The two things that I want to mention here is that we have an outer block that's from this HTML tag to this HTML tag. Inside I have two inner blocks. So these are blocks of code. You can tell by their indenting, the indenting, and that they're surrounded by some kind of delimiter. In this case, it's a tag. So I have a head and a body. So those are both inner blocks of code. The head block tells the browser things about the page, like what's the title that we're going to put on the tab. So this would appear up here if this was a browser. And it's going to tell me also to load in a script that we're going to write together. It's very, very simple script. So then we also have a body, and the body is what gets displayed on the page. So I have little blocks inside it. So I have one that says make this into a title. In fact, I can pull it up and we can see it. So this is the title right here. And then I have some inputs, and I have a button, and I have a little line. So we'll close that for right now. But I have an input A, and its type is text. So I'm going to get 2 text inputs. And then I'm going to put the result onto the page when I run the program. So I have a little button that says run the program, and inside it I have what we call an on-click handler. This is a very simple way to do this, and this is actually a block of code right here. It says go out and find the program combine, or find the function combine, the JavaScript program, and run it. So it's a block of code. You'll see that inside I have a semicolon to delimit each of the lines. Some languages do that. In fact, a lot of languages use semicolons. JavaScript's one of those ones that's a little forgiving. If we leave off the semicolon, it'll be okay. But when you start to realize that it does make difference in different places, you start to be a little more picky about how you do things. This code that we're trying to run, we just wanted to actually take these 2 values. So if we put hello and we put world in here, we would want it to actually combine the 2 and put it where the results is. So there's some things I'm taking advantage of in HTML that I'm not going to bother explaining here, but definitely every language has its own particularities, as I mentioned before. I'm just going to leverage those things and write a block so that we can see it. So I have a JavaScript program that gets loaded in. In fact, it gets loaded in up here. JavaScript, what we're going to do is we're going to write a block of code. So we need to actually tell it, because we're writing functions here, we're not just writing code that just runs automatically. We're writing something that we're going to call on when we use a button. So we're going to call it combine, which is what we called it before. And you'll see I put the little brackets after it. And all I'm going to do here is I'm going to say the result, which is, if I come over here, I've named this ID result. The nice thing about web is that I can simply target the things on a web page using their ID tags. So I'm going to go result inner text, because I'm going to change the text inside of it. I'm going to put some text inside of it, and I'm just going to say input A, and I'm going to put the value that's inside my form, and I'm going to add to it the input B, which I'll show you in a second. We'll just put the value of those 2 things in it, and this is my block of code. You'll see I have my squiggly lines, and I have my instruction. Now I could have multiple instructions, and in fact, there's a lot of different things I could do here. I could check to see if it was a number. If it was numbers, I would want the numbers to actually not be treated like text. I would want them to actually be treated like numbers and added together, for instance. But right now, this is just going to combine everything. So if we save this and we come over here, when we run this, it's going to actually load that code in, and we should be able to come down here and write hello world. And if we run the program, it will now actually go out, find that block of code, and execute the instructions that are inside the block of code. Building a program is just building blocks upon blocks upon blocks and organizing how we flow through those blocks of code. Blocks can be complicated. They can have all kinds of sub-blocks inside of them. For instance, if I wanted to check, this will get a little more complicated, but let's close this. We'll come over here and we'll say if, and I want to check to see if these are, well, we'll start for the easy one I have at my disposal is to check if they're not numbers. So I'm going to put input a.value. So if it's not a number, or the other one is not a number, so I realize I'm not dealing with numbers, then I'm just going to put them together. Otherwise, I'm going to make sure that I treat them like numbers. So I could just, so is not a number, and input b.value, and input b.value is going to be right here. Input A, input B. Notice that they are case sensitive. Lots and lots of languages are case sensitive. Not all of them, but many of them are case sensitive, especially for identifiers. So anything that identifies something, like identifying an HTML element or identifying a variable, those things are going to be case sensitive because it's a lot more efficient for the interpreter to actually create a label that's case sensitive. So here I'm just going to go and I'm going to go copy this, put it in here because that's what I want to do. And in fact, I'm going to go and add in here. I'll put an and in here just so that I can see that it's combining the two values together. And this is a block inside of a block, so it's a sub-block. Basically, we're going to see this in our next tutorial here. This is a branching construct, and I'm just going to space them out because I like them to be spaced out. And then in here, I'm just going to go result dot inner text is equal to, and then I'm going to say parse int, and then I'm going to go input a dot value, and then I'm going to add to it parse. I mean, if I had a floating point number, I would have to account for that. I'm just trying to keep it simple, just so that you can see that we can have blocks within blocks. And I'll put a semicolon here. I technically should put this just to say go back to where you came from. That's just for being complete. Normally blocks, inner blocks won't have that, but outer blocks, like your main program or any of your functions, should have some kind of a return. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later as well. Save that. We'll come over here. We'll come in here and we'll say red 7. That's a good little program. It should say red and 7, but if I say 12 and 14, it should give me 26. So now I've written a couple different blocks inside to control how it behaves, but everything is building up from these blocks. Blocks are used to build our programs. The next thing we're going to look at is code branching. We'll see you soon.